western England. In the northeast, there will be here. Thick cloud will cover most parts, though there will be some brightness across Northumberland. The rain will be heaviest across western and northwestern Scotland, where some localised impacts are possible, with strong winds here too. It will be drier and brighter for southeastern parts. It's looking cloudy, wet and windy across Northern Ireland this lunchtime, with outbreaks of rain. Some of these could be heavy at times as they push through on the brisk northwesterly winds. The weather will stay unsettled through the rest of the day with cloud, strong winds and spells of rain. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. This is To The Point on GBNews with me, Patrick, Christys and Anaya Falarineman on your TV, radio and online. An action-packed show today. Of course, we're going to be discussing the allegations of war crimes levelled against Vladimir Putin and his troops. And we're also having a look at whether or not there's a dangerous drink and drug culture in Parliament.
Yes, make sure you get in touch, as usual, with your views, GBviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting through those throughout the show. But first, it's time for latest news.
A very good morning to you. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date today on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister is seeking a tough response from NATO allies this week, following his condemnation of Russia's, what he described as despicable attacks against Ukrainian civilians in Irpin and in Bucha. Ukraine's president's spokesman said authorities had found what looked exactly like war crimes, including the bodies of executed civilians and mass graves in Ukraine. New satellite images show a mass grave approximately 14 metres long in the grounds of a church in Bucha. Volodymyr Zelensky says war crimes there and in other occupied cities are to be examined by the UN Security Council tomorrow.
I want every mother of every Russian soldier to see the bodies of dead people in Bucha, Irpin and Gostomel. How was it possible to rape women and kill them in front of their children, making fun of their bodies even after they died? Why did they crush people's bodies with tanks? What did the Ukrainian city of Bucha do to Russia? How did all of this become possible?
The UK's Defence Ministry says Russian forces, including mercenaries, are refocusing their offensive into the Donbass region in Ukraine. Well, the former UK commander, Colonel Hamish de Breton Gordon, told us the response of the international community has taken Russia by surprise.
What we must do now is try and sue for some sort of peace, so that Ukraine, this brave nation, can start rebuilding and get back on its feet. And if it means that the Russians hang on to a little bit of Ukraine in the east, then that's probably a price we'll have to pay.
The International Trade Secretary has said the UK must build its green economy to eliminate Russian fuel from our energy mix once and for all. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused turmoil in global energy markets. The Business Secretary said the UK could build up to 7 new nuclear power stations by 2050 to boost its homegrown energy supply. Well, Francis Livens is the director of Dalton Nuclear Institute, says those nuclear reactors could be built sooner.
I think there's a lot of new ideas, there's new technologies out there that really could make an impact far sooner than 20 or 30 years. It might take 20 or 30 years to see the full effect of this, but I think you could start to make a difference within 10 to 15 years.
In some other news now, the government's former ethics chief has reportedly been fined over the Partygate scandal. Well, the Daily Telegraph says that Helen McNamara, she used to be the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, received a £50 fine in connection with a leaving do that was held in the Cabinet Office in June of 2020. 20 fixed penalty notices have been issued as part of the police investigation into COVID rule-breaching parties in Westminster. The family of the Conservative MP David Warburton is reportedly standing by him as he faces an investigation into alleged misconduct. The Sunday Times reported that 3 women had made formal complaints about his behaviour. His brother-in-law told the Daily Mail the politician and his wife believe he's not done anything wrong. The MP for Somerton and Frome was admitted to a psychiatric hospital yesterday to be treated for shock and stress. EasyJet cancelled more than 200 flights over the weekend. They've blamed high levels of sickness and staff shortages from COVID infections. The airline said it made efforts to put extra crew on standby over the weekend, but it was forced to make 62 cancellations of flights preemptively that were supposed to take off today. Travel editor Simon Calder says many families are falling at the first hurdle on their first holiday for a couple of years.
You're one of the tens of thousands of people whose flights have been cancelled today. Then the airline absolutely has to get you to your destination as swiftly as possible. They have to provide compensation if you've been held up by more than 3 hours. And they're also going to have to get you some hotel accommodation if you're stuck.
Shortness of breath, having an aching body and also loss of appetite. Well, they're 3 of 9 symptoms that have newly been added to the official list of COVID-19 signs of illness. The changes added to the NHS website emerged just days after free universal testing for coronavirus ended in England. Infection levels have hit a record high in the UK now, with almost 5 million people estimated to be currently infected. Adults wearing face masks has hindered some babies' ability to understand facial expressions. Well, Ofsted report that children have been affected after being unable to see lip movements or mouth shapes. And actually, they've increasingly started to use accents and voices from TV programmes, having missed out on having real conversations. The Labour Party says the average cost of a full-time nursery place is now just over £273 a week. The Shadow Education Secretary says parents are being forced to work fewer hours or leave jobs because they cannot find or afford childcare. A government spokesperson says more than £3.5 billion has been invested in free childcare in each of the last 3 years. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Inman and Patrick Christys on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up to kickstart your day, so here's what's on the menu.
Yes, right. Well, Russian forces stand accused of war crimes. As Ukrainian military recapture territory around the capital, Kiev, more evidence of atrocities are now emerging. We'll be live in Ukraine with the Ukrainian Member of Parliament for more.
Yes, and writer Graeme Linehan has accused trans campaigners of trying to destroy him for standing up for sex-based rights. We'll be talking to a campaigner, Caroline Farrow, who says that she's been a victim of a very similar string of abuse.
Absolutely. And Tory MP David Warburton has been suspended by the Conservative Party after alleged cocaine use and accusations of harassment against women. We'll be talking to James Heal of The Spectator for the latest on that.
Yes, we have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, so make sure you get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on the allegations of Russian war crimes on the people of Ukraine.
Civilians shot in the back as they fled, women repeatedly raped, children mutilated, hundreds of bodies dumped in mass graves. These are just some of the allegations levelled against Putin's troops, as they, and indeed he, stand accused of war crimes. Human Rights Watch appears convinced that Russian troops are breaking the laws of war. They claim a woman told them that a Russian soldier had repeatedly raped her in a school in the Kharkiv region where she and her family had been sheltering on March 13th. She said that he beat her, cut her face, her neck and her hair with a knife. The next day, apparently, the woman fled to Kharkiv, where she was able to get medical treatment and other services. Other allegations include Russian soldiers in the village of Vorzel, about 50 kilometres northwest of Kiev. Apparently, they threw a smoke grenade into a basement, then shot a woman and a 14-year-old child as they emerged from that basement where they'd been sheltering. Apparently, there have been numerous reports of civilians being made to kneel down and then being shot in the back of the head, sometimes with their hands tied behind their back. Now, although videos are extremely hard to verify, one must always be very careful to avoid falling into the trap of propaganda during times of war. There is some compelling footage from around the towns outside Kiev. It shows bodies lying in the streets as though people were gunned down as they went about their daily business. Now, Alexei Gorcharenko is a Ukrainian MP who will be joining us shortly, actually. He took a video yesterday showing the aftermath of a Russian attack on a civilian car. A little girl was badly wounded. A lady believed to be her grandmother was slumped in the front seat. Her head had been blown off. We clearly have to ensure that the evidence is entirely there before we start lobbing war crime accusations around, but it is starting to look pretty overwhelming. One of two things has happened, hasn't it? And they're both very bad. Either Putin is directly behind these alleged war crimes, in which case he is a war criminal, a butcher, a madman, a psychopath, and someone who should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Or Putin has lost control of his troops and they are simply acting of their own accord, committing war crimes as they retreat, potentially in revenge for the heavy losses they've suffered at the hands of the brave Ukrainian troops and civilians. No matter which one of those situations has happened and which one is true, there is one common denominator, isn't it? The slaughter and rape of innocent civilians. And I have a sinking feeling that this is going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be going live shortly, actually, to Alexei, who's the Ukrainian MP there, who's adamant about that these are war crimes taking place. But
yeah, I mean, I think some of the reports have been, beyond words, just brutal, sickening, and I don't know if there's much other language than you can say other than evil. And I think, that's why I think the priority should be, from the beginning till now, to what is the quickest way to end this war, because the reality of war, as we have even seen in wars before, the rape of Nanking in the 20th century and so on, often leads to the most brutality and horrendous acts of human suffering.
It does. And we were talking a bit off air, actually. Be keen to get your views on this at home, ladies and gentlemen, gbviews@gbnews.uk, about whether or not Zelensky goes for neutrality, right? Because I would imagine that a lot of people, a lot of Ukrainian people potentially, would see that as a failure, because what have they fought and died for in that sense? But I don't know, how do you feel about that?
I think that's a very interesting point. I think it is a massive challenge. After the last few years, NATO and the EU have dangled membership for the Ukrainians for a very long time, and many of them have hoped that that would be at the end, that they would be able to get closer to the West and be able to have that kind of possible military protection and economic stability. And therefore, I think there will be a lot of questions in Ukraine if that is the reality. And I do worry that if there are going to be seeds sown that could breed a lot of resentment that may well unravel in several years down the line.
I suspect so. Now, look, we are hoping at some point to go live to Ukraine. As you can imagine, it's a constantly moving picture over there. I mean, there is a war on after all. So we're going to hopefully get over there very, very shortly. But authorities do obviously say that there's been war crimes that appear to have taken place. It looks exactly like war crimes, is the quote. And they've accused Russia of committing a massacre now in Bucha, just outside the capital of Kiev. Bodies of civilians with bound hands and close-range gunshot wounds were found. Evidence of torture. Mass graves was also present.
Yes, Prime Minister Boris Johnson condemned the despicable civilian attacks, his words, saying there were yet more evidence of war crimes. Ukrainian President Zelensky, addressing the Grammy Awards hours ago, urged viewers to tell the truth about the war. The revelations of civilian executions come after a weekend of fighting around the capital, in which Ukrainian forces liberated the entire Kiev region. Well, joining us now is Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, to give us an update.
Yes, it's extraordinary. For those watching on television, we could see some of those pictures that were just being shown on our screens. Unfortunately, we've had to blur them out. They are that graphic. It's extraordinary to see the sort of systematic murder that appears to have taken place as these Russian troops have withdrawn from these cities. It's interesting that the Western leaders have gone further in their language than they have done in quite some time, talking in terms about war crimes. Although if we note those quotes, they say this appears to be war criminality. They're using conditional language because, of course, it is up to the International Criminal Court to determine this, but clearly very strong terms and asking the International Criminal Court to investigate.
Well, Russia, for their part in it, are saying that a lot of this stuff is staged, aren't they? That's their line, isn't it?
Certainly, Russia have been spewing misinformation to their population and attempting to do it to the wider world as well. It's extraordinary the degree to which the Russian population actually buy the line that is put out by the Kremlin, that is put out on Russian state television as well. Just lie after lie after lie, whether it's the idea that, this fanciful idea that America is creating bioweapons in Ukraine, a trick they tried in Georgia with just about the same forged documentation. They've also been saying that the war crimes have been committed by the other side, or they've been staged, or like really fanciful stuff that you couldn't possibly imagine to be truthful. And yet Russia has time and time again gone for the ridiculous, gone to try to muddy the picture, trying to make everything hard to discern and leave their population bamboozled as a result.
And, I mean, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has said that she would support investigations into war crimes, but isn't it incredibly difficult, even if there is evidence, to collate enough evidence to get an actual conviction in the International Criminal Court? That actual reality is still quite rare.
It certainly is. There are recent examples of wars, particularly within Europe, actually, in the 1990s, where there have been successful convictions, but these things take decades in many cases. And indeed, collecting evidence in the middle of a war zone is very hard to do. There are charitable organisations that are currently out in Ukraine that are scanning both what is published on the internet, but also collecting information on the ground as well. But as you say, once you find that an alleged or what appears to have been a war crime has been committed in a particular place, often there's no one left around to say who did it, who in particular did it. So yes, you can go after the commanders of the Russian military, but finding the individual soldiers who committed those acts, that's a very tricky thing to do.
Yeah, indeed. Tom, look, thank you very much, as always. Thank you for joining us and picking our way through this particular topic. Now, we are going to go to some of your views now, GB Views, GBNews.uk, and I'd actually like to sort of start with one directed at you, actually, Tom, here, from Russell, who says that you're looking very dishy this morning.
Well, that's incredibly kind. It's always nice to get a compliment, I suppose. I've just got back from holiday, so that might be part of it.
Part of it? Oh, don't dig yourself down. Tom, you look like this every single day. Fantastic stuff. Right, OK, let's move on to matters more serious now, obviously. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about what we opened up the show with, of course, these devastating images that are coming out of Ukraine. And people saying, well, the line has very well and truly been crossed. This is according to Dave. Neutrality makes sense to end the conflict, then arm them to the teeth so that neutrality, like Finland, is backed up by force. That's Philip. He's got a solution.
I mean, Bob has said, I'm surprised more isn't being made of Putin's statement that Finland and Sweden shouldn't join NATO on pain of retaliation. Well, it is very interesting looking at some of the polls in many of those countries in Europe that have not joined NATO, I think that this invasion has very much swung them in favour of joining NATO. It has been quite counterproductive on the part of, Putin's actions, because then it justifies the idea that they need to be in some kind of military protective alliance out of fear that they may well be invaded by Russia.
No, absolutely, yeah, it has backfired in that sense. This is an interesting one from Sandra. Thank you, Sandra. Given what's happening, is it about time that we brought back national service in the UK? A lot of young adults have had to go through a pandemic. They're now witnessing this terrible war in Ukraine. Many young people have no doubt been rejected from the armed forces, apparently for being overweight or having asthma. I'm not sure they'd have me these days, Sandra, but there we go.
Yes, and Alan also says, with the atrocities being committed in Ukraine, it draws parallels with atrocities committed by Serbs on Bosnian Muslims, especially Srebrenica, and we kind of alluded to that earlier. The solution was airstrikes by the US and UK. Unfortunately, that option isn't available, and Putin knows it.
Yes, indeed. All right, well, look, keep these views coming in. GB Views, the GBnews.uk. Really, a lot of it is just about the reaction to some of the footage and pictures that emerged over the weekend and then again this morning. What appeared to show, anyway, pretty brutal scenes in Ukraine, potential war crimes, etc., etc. Has this been a tipping point for you now? What do you think should happen? There's talk of this no-fly zone. I mean, that to me seems like that's basically just a declaration of war because of how that would pan out. But where are you at on this current issue? GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Yes, after the break, we'll be talking to a retired British Major General about how these accusations of war crimes can be acted upon, just after the break.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy, wet and windy for many, much more unsettled than it has been recently. Let's take a look at the details. Taking a closer look into the southwest of England, and there will be rain for many parts this lunchtime. It's also going to be cloudy and windy, though relatively mild. Around London and the southeast of England, and the early rain will clear through the morning, meaning things will be drier by midday with some brightness. It will also be cloudy and wet at times across much of Wales. The rain is likely to be heaviest across northern and western parts. After a wet and blustery morning, there are signs things will be drier, but still cloudy by midday for the Midlands. Further rain is expected later though, highs of around 13 Celsius but feeling colder. Whilst it's going to be pretty wet for northwestern England, in the northeast there will be less rain here. Thick cloud will cover most parts, though there will be some brightness across Northumberland. The rain will be heaviest across western and northwestern Scotland, where some localised impacts are possible, with strong winds here too. It will be drier and brighter for southeastern parts. It's looking cloudy, wet and windy across Northern Ireland this lunchtime, with outbreaks of rain. Some of these could be heavy at times as they push through on the brisk northwesterly winds. The weather will stay unsettled through the rest of the day with cloud, strong winds and spells of rain. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's about to go 10:22. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Flanagan on GB News. We are, of course, live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, as we've been discussing this morning, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has called Russian forces butchers after investigators discovered the bodies of hundreds of mutilated civilians as Ukrainian forces slowly begin to retake Russian-held areas of the country.
Yeah, really disturbing and indeed very graphic stuff, that actually. Joining us now to discuss this harrowing story further is Major General Sir Tim Cross, a retired British Army Major General with over 30 years service. Look, thank you so much for joining us. I suppose the big question is, are these war crimes?
Well, I suspect they are, but actually proving it is never going to be easy. I was a witness, actually, at the International Court in The Hague for war crimes in the Balkans. I served there 3 times in the 90s. And it is very difficult to prove and convict people of war crimes. One of the issues is finding the people who actually did it on the ground, the tactical level, if you like. And then there's the issue of the commanders and whether they actually ordered this to happen or whether they ignored it or, you know, whatever the circumstances were. But I don't have any doubts at all that there is terrible things happening in Ukraine. I have to say, probably on both sides to some degree, but nonetheless, I'm sure the Russian atrocities are far worse, and what we're seeing here is clear evidence of that.
Yeah, and on that point about it being very difficult to actually collate the evidence and ultimately convict, I mean, are there anything else then that can be done to just highlight the horrors of what is going on?
Well, the media obviously is a key part of that, and getting people out on the ground, gathering the evidence. What you have to have is clearly the people who can gather that evidence and produce it in court. So, you know, hearsay is not enough. Even photographic evidence actually is not sufficient in and of itself, because when people are, in inverted commas, scattered around, well, their dead bodies, etc., it's very difficult to prove how they were killed. Now, some of the stories we're hearing is that the people are, you know, in mass graves or gathered together under tarpaulins or whatever. So, you know, there are certain ways of doing that, but you do need clear evidence that's going to stand up in court, because, you know, rightly or wrongly, whoever ends up by being indicted will have defense lawyers and so forth who will do all they can to pull the evidence apart. I mean, you know, these are not surprising. What is happening is not surprising. I'm afraid that in the UK and the West generally, we've become a little bit, we've become very, very, not arrogant, but we don't understand the terrible things that go on in these places. I mean, I've watched the mass graves being dug up in Iraq. I've seen what people do to each other in places like Northern Ireland. My brigade built and ran refugee camps in Kosovo. War is always chaos, uncertainty, and awful things, terrible things happening on both sides. And we shouldn't be surprised that this has happened. Now, that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't take it, as we are, quite rightly, extremely seriously. And we should do all we can to help the Ukraine in particular to gather the evidence that's going to end up by putting people in front of that international court.
Yes, but just on that, just to clarify, I think, for our listeners, our viewers as well, of course, which is that realistically, unless they find the actual individuals who have, you know, shot civilians in the back of the head or raped women, etc., they, I suppose, could always say, you know, their commanders could always say, well, they were not aware of it, they were retreating or whatever, they were ahead of their troops potentially, they were not aware of it. Putin himself, of course, can say, presumably, look, you know, how can I have possibly ordered this? Look at me, I'm in a bunker in the Kremlin, you know. So realistically, it's unlikely that anyone is probably ever going to get charged with war crimes for what we're seeing. Is that right?
Well, I would hope somebody will in the end. I mean, it takes a long time. We're still seeing people indicted as a result of Kosovo and indeed of, you know, the Balkans and so on. But what part of this is the is the culture of the organisations we're talking about. In the British military, we put a lot of time and effort into teaching our guys things like the Geneva Conventions, the laws of armed conflict, the rules of engagement. And there is evidential proof that we do that. So the culture is a part of how the soldiers will, behave and react on the battlefield. So investigating how people are trained, what they're taught, how they're dealt with when things go wrong is all a part of this picture. But nonetheless, it is, I'm afraid, very difficult to prove individuals are culpable at the end of the day. There will be all sorts of reasons why people will be able to, cover themselves over and so on. But it doesn't mean to say we mustn't try. It doesn't mean to say that we mustn't do what is happening now, which is as this evidence is uncovered, photographic evidence is pulled together, the highly trained guys who go in and do and investigate these sort of crimes. I mean, when I say I watched the war graves being, or the mass graves being dug up, there were people there from around the world gathering that evidence. They knew what they were doing, and they were able to pull together some pretty insightful reports. So that must happen. We must ensure that happens collectively.
And also on that point that you made earlier about whether perhaps there is an arrogance or an unawareness on the part of Western countries about the brutal reality of war. I mean, on that point, what do you think about how the war has been covered? I mean, I've heard some commentators saying that overwhelmingly the media has kind of focused on the refugees, which is, of course, an important aspect, but not actually really put to the fore the reality of the conflict when it comes to what it's like on the ground. And maybe there would be a different reaction if we actually focus much more on the conflict rather than the kind of broader consequences, such as the outpouring of refugees. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I think there's some truth in that. I mean, it was interesting in your introduction, you talked about the fact that, we blur out the pictures of what is happening. We haven't got, of course, when I went in on operations, we used to have UK media alongside us, people like Kate Adie and lots of others, Martin Bell and so on, who were alongside us and were taking photographs and producing daily reports and so on. I don't want to be unfair to the media thus far, but reporting from a rooftop in Kiev or from cellars in Kiev or other cities doesn't bring home the reality of what's happening. So having media up front alongside is where you really want this to be. Now, I don't know whether the Ukrainian military have stopped, in inverted commas, international journalists being up front, although we are beginning to see far more of that with journalists working closer to the front. But how you portray this on the media is really important. Now, you would expect me to say, I think people need to see the reality of what war is like, because we can become very immune to it. I mean, people play video games and so forth, but that's not what these operations are like on the ground. It is always chaos. It is always, terrible impact of, artillery and rocket attacks and so on. It's all very well, as we're now seeing, buildings with holes in them, but that doesn't really bring home the reality of what's happening to individual people and collectively on the ground. So yeah, there's a difficult balance here, but I would say the refugee crisis is clearly important. And as I said earlier, my brigade built and ran refugee camps, so I've got a lot of sympathy with that. But the hardness, the cruelty, the reality of what it's like to be involved in battle, is very difficult to portray. But I think we should see a bit more of it, probably.
I'm inclined to agree. Thank you very much, Sir Tim Cross, Major General Sir Tim Cross, the retired British Army Major General.
Thank you.
With more than 30 years of service. Thank you very, very much. And, yeah, I mean, look, he certainly spoke a lot of sense.
I thought that was very insightful perspectives offered there by Major General, because I think there's a lot of truth. And I read an article, funnily enough, recently by Brendan O'Neill and Spite Online, who talked about the fact that overwhelmingly the coverage, understandably so in some instances, has been of the refugees, but it's been kind of victims or, children and women and elderly people, which invites us to emote. And obviously it's a very harrowing thing, but we need to also get our head around about the real geopolitical reality and the brutality of war on the ground, which is overwhelmingly fought by men. And I think that has not always been at the forefront.
No, it's not. And I think it's an important point as well that there will be issues going on both sides. I think it's important not to sit here and say, well, look, I'm sure the Ukrainian troops even are entirely squeaky clean, but it's almost kind of not the point, really.
Well, one is invading, another country, and one is in their homeland defending. So I think even then there is a huge power imbalance there.
No, absolutely. And yes, it's devastating stuff that's happened. Interesting one here from Alan, who says, I wonder how quickly all this is over, that people start trading with Russia again. And I wonder whether or not, with things like we're seeing right now happening, could be the tipping point for that, whether or not that will happen. Having said that, though, you know, capitalism, greed.
Yeah, I mean, you know, unfortunately, I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing at this stage, but I think that will be a reality.
Yeah.
Just, for example, right now, they are still dependent, Western Europe, on Russian gas, and so that is just something that's unavoidable. And Putin actually said in the last few days that if they want to continue getting their energy, they'll have to pay in rubles, and they have rejected that. So I do think that is something we'll have to confront.
I agree completely. Well, look, keep these views coming in. They're coming in thick and fast, actually. I'm trying to keep on top of them all there. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll go to those a little bit later in the show. Now, after the break, a Tory MP has been suspended after alleged cocaine use and accusations of harassment against women. We'll be talking to James Heal from The Spectator about that, just to see whether or not there's a dangerous, damaging culture of this kind of stuff going on right in the corridors of power. But before that, here's a look at this morning's news.
It's 10:32. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date here on GB News. Now, the Prime Minister says Vladimir Putin's arsenal will never break the spirit of Ukraine's people or conquer their homeland. Well, those comments come after the spokesperson for the Ukrainian president said authorities had found what looked exactly like war crimes. Boris Johnson's going to be seeking a tough response at a meeting of NATO allies later this week. The Foreign Secretary has announced £10 million of support for organisations working with survivors of sexual violence in Ukraine. Liz Truss is travelling to Poland to meet with her Ukrainian and Polish counterparts in Warsaw. She's also going to meet with aid organisations supporting Ukrainian refugees. The government's former ethics chief has reportedly been fined over the Partygate scandal. The Daily Telegraph says Helen McNamara was fined £50 in connection with a leaving do held in the Cabinet Office in June 2020. EasyJet cancelled more than 200 flights over the weekend, blaming high levels of sickness and staff shortages from COVID infections. On what is, for many, the start of the school Easter holidays, other delays have been reported at the Port of Dover and Manchester and Heathrow airports. Climate change campaigners are staging a protest at an oil facility near Heathrow Airport on their fourth day of action. Extinction Rebellion say around 30 protesters were at SA West oil facility in West London, where they're urging the government to stop using fossil fuels. You're now up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to the point.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Good morning, everybody. It's 10:36. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Flanagan on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning, and I believe we've got quite a special guest.
Yes, joining us now from Ukraine to give us more information is Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Alexei Goroshenko. Thank you for joining us this morning, Alexei. What are you and what is happening? Where are you and what is happening around you right now?
I'm now in the train coming from Kiev to western part of our country. But the most important things that happened that last days, when after liberation of a towns near Kiev, Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, we found the evidences of a massacre which Russians organized there, a real genocide where hundreds of civilians were killed. I was there by myself. I've seen it by my own eyes, and I have seen awful things, absolutely. Just bodies on the streets, killed civilians, killed women. I saw one burnt child in the car. It was so awful. I can't explain you, but yes, and that was just civilians, and that was absolutely unjustified, and that's what Russians did during the month of occupation of this area.
Indeed, and Alexei, I keep tabs on your Twitter page all the time, so I'm watching it all the time, and I saw yesterday, there was one of a car full of civilians that had been shot. A lady, sadly, she didn't have her head anymore. Her head had been blown off. It's really, really damaging stuff. Are you concerned that as you travel across the country, as more of the country becomes liberated, you're going to find a lot more of these cases happening? Oh, is he frozen? Oh, I think, have we lost him? Oh, we'll just try and try and get him back up if we can there. I think he's obviously on a train in rural Ukraine, so I think it's to be expected there might be the odd little difficulty there. But look, he's adamant. He's adamant that these are war crimes, that what he's seen is war crimes. But I suppose when we spoke to the Major General before, what he's saying is it's one thing knowing it, it's one thing seeing it with your own eyes, it's another thing proving it in a court of law and getting those responsible.
Yes, and also, I mean, we don't know what kinds of discussions are being had in relation to the peace negotiations, and for all we know, that Russia may well say that actually that may be a condition of peace, no prosecution. So there are so many different elements.
It's a really good point,
and layers involved in this discussion.
It's a really good point, now, actually, and one I certainly hadn't thought of, which is, I suppose as a condition maybe they would do that. It might be a very, very bitter pill, I think, for Zelensky to swallow. Certainly a very hard one at that. Well, we're going to move away. Unfortunately, it doesn't look as though we can get Alexei back anytime soon, but like we said, he's reporting to us live from a war zone, essentially, and he's on a train. So, I mean, to be expected, there might be some issues there, but hopefully we'll bring him back on at a little bit of a later day. Very brave man, by the way. He's running towards... He's an MP. He's just an MP, right? And he's running towards the bullets whilst many people would run away. And talking of MPs, we're sticking with this theme, aren't we?
Yes, well, Tory MP David Warburton has been admitted to a psychiatric hospital after allegations of sex and drug abuse behaviour were levelled against the MP in the Sunday Times.
Well, the Conservative Whip's office has said that he's been suspended from the parliamentary party while the investigation was ongoing. Now, Mr Warburton has denied any wrongdoing. There's obviously some pretty incriminating pictures out there. Let's talk now to journalist James Heald, diary editor at The Spectator and man about town. James, what do you make of this? Does this point to a rather brutal drink and drugs culture and potentially a misogynistic culture right in the corridors of power?
Well, morning, Patrick. I think that the story has taken off. I mean, one of which is just a great story about a whole series of allegations. That you've got donations from Russian businessmen, you've got things about drug abuse, etc., and misconduct of staff. But I think that this story has really cut through because it touches on two big issues at the moment. One of which is the culture in Westminster, with things like Partygate going on, and looking at the socialising culture of Westminster. And the other point is the way in which MP and their staff are treated in Westminster. You've seen in recent years a number of MPs be affected. Things like Charlie Elphick, who was jailed and was involved in looking at how he treated women. And so I think that this is cut through really because of how it relates to issues about what Westminster is going on at the heart of it. And clearly now I think there is a lot of pushback from the parliamentary authorities to try and clamp down on some of the stuff that's been going on in recent years.
But James, I mean, do some factors make this type of behaviour more likely? Because it does strike me that if we did have a politics where politicians had a close ear to the public, felt that they would be held accountable if there was wrongdoing, and actually their idea of being an MP was very much public servants wanting to serve the democratic interests of the country, that they may well be less likely to engage in these kinds of behaviours. I mean, do you see anything like this as related to perhaps something wrong with our politics right now?
Well, possibly. I think that the issue of drinking politics has always been there in Parliament. I mean, there used to be literal, bars on the floor, so that MPs who were so intoxicated quite literally dragged themselves from the bars in Parliament into the Commons lobbies to go and vote. And you look at the history of the 20th century in Parliament. There's a long history of drink. Alan Clark famously turned up at the dispatch box, tired and emotional. And also, there's the social element of politics as well. I mean, politics is a lot about cutting deals and compromise and gossip and socialising. And I think all those factors, and of course the stresses involved, do lend itself. Most people in politics, I think, can handle their drink, and I think it's normally a broadly good social culture, but there are negative aspects, as you say. And I think that part of the reason this why's come out now is not because necessarily our politicians are any worse than they were 50 years ago. It's just that with smartphones, I mean, you saw some of those incriminating photos which Patrick mentioned. I think smartphones means things get caught a lot more now, and it's quite a lot harder to hush up some of the stuff that used to go on in Parliament.
Absolutely. Now, just talk to us a little bit about the allegations that this may be some part of a sting operation involving some of this Russian money, etc. Is there any truth to this being a sting operation? Is it just the fact that someone took a picture of him next to some cocaine, really? It doesn't seem very stingy to me, but I don't know, you may know better than me. There certainly is a bit of money swirling around, isn't there?
Well, I mean, I think I did see one person saying that I'm not sure whether if you were a foreign government and you were going to go after the country's top political operatives, an MP who's willing to appear to pose next to a photograph of this incriminating sort would necessarily be your first target. I mean, there's been some discussion about this, some briefings, but I think equally it's important not to invalidate the testimony of those women who spoke to the Sunday Times about this. More shall emerge. I mean, obviously, David Walton's now checked himself into a psychiatric hospital. But I think that what we've seen so far, and the Sunday Times is very confident in their reporting, which suggests that, there could well be a sort of by-election going on here if the Tories think that, frankly, he's been caught banging to rights.
I mean, is there any way you think that this could impact the Conservatives more broadly on that point about, by-election and so on? I mean, because it's not kind of the first story. It seems relatively regular that we see one scandal or another involving MPs across the House and so on, but particularly Conservative MPs.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, he's got a 19,000 majority, but of course that's partly because Dave Walton came into the seat when the Lib Dems had that collapse in 2015. Traditionally, the Lib Dems did fairly well here in the southwest of England, so there could be a possible challenge, a bit like we saw in Chesham and Amersham. I think what is interesting, of course, is does this turn into a narrative? Remember in the 90s, you had Tory sleaze and all sorts of things coming out every other week, it seemed. And there is a danger at the moment. Some of the headlines that have been going around could lead to a cumulative impression of a tired government, and a government which is unable to get its own house in order. I don't think we're at that stage yet, but depends how many more stories are going to keep dropping on a Sunday morning like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, James, thank you very, very much. As always, James Hill, Diary Editor at Spectator. We'll have to have you on a lot more regularly than we've been doing in the past. Thank you so much for your time. Right, we're just going to move away from that story now and go to comedy writer Graeme Linehan. So he's known for Father Ted, a fantastic Father Ted. Absolutely love that. Black Books as well, another good one. Anyway, he's accused trans rights activists of bullying and harassment.
Yes, Graeme says that speaking out for women's sex-based rights has seen him condemned as a bigot, losing not only work but his social media platforms as well. In an interview, he detailed how police officers turned up at his family home and that members of his family were also harassed by online trolls. He isn't the only person to raise the issue of intimidation by trans activists, as Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling this weekend highlighted some of the threats of violence and intimidation she has been subject to over social media. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is Caroline Farrow, campaign director of Citizen Go, who has herself experienced harassment and intimidation by activists as well. Thank you for joining us this morning, Caroline. I mean, it is some quite shocking, some of the reports that J.K. Rowling has put forward about death threats. I think she said that she could paint her entire house with the death and rape threats that she receives. I mean, why is this being tolerated, that people are facing threats and intimidation for holding what is actually quite a mainstream view about gender and sex?
It's a very good point, Mercy. And I think it's actually a very small group of activists on social media. But what we have to remember is that we've got institutions like the police force and the local education authorities captured by this gender ideology. So like Graeme Linehan, I too have had death threats, I've had rape threats. I had an entire blog set up. It was a hate blog, We Hate Caroline Farrow. It ran for 6 months. There were death threats, there were rape threats, there were threats of acid attacks against my children. My husband was outed, I say outed, his mobile phone was published. Our whole family was targeted. I was also targeted by the same two activists who targeted Graeme Linehan, Dr. Adrian Harrop, who has faced sanction from the General Medical Council now for his deplorable behaviour, and also Stephanie Hayden, who has sued, I think, around 30 people over the last 5 years for the same thing, for harassment, for misgendering. And I think it's literally that people see the transgender issue and they think, gosh, you can't be mean and you can't be nasty. I mean, I get a very small taste of what J.K. Rowling receives, simply because I have fewer followers than her. But Joanne tweeted me a couple of weeks ago just to say, big love, Caroline. And Pink News, who have smeared Graeme Linehan repeatedly, ran another hate article against me. And I think it's literally that institutions just can't see beyond this, transgender, that we're being transphobic, that we're being unkind to transgender people. And in fact, the police, in response to this hate blog that was set up against me and threatened my entire family, just said to me, Caroline, please, can you stop talking about transgender issues on Twitter? There's absolutely no balance. And I have huge sympathy with what happened.
But you should never... Caroline, you should never stop talking about it on Twitter, because that's how people win, right? It's the silencing of it. And you've hit on numerous good points there that I want to pick up on, because just because people drape themselves in a rainbow flag doesn't mean they can't behave like the mafia, right? And they want to take everything from these people. They want to take your job. They want to take your wife. They want to take your kids. They want to take it all, OK? They don't want you to be left with anything left in your life. They want you to just be there in a puddle of yourself with the smouldering wreckage of your life sitting there behind you. And that is not very tolerant, is it? That's not very nice. And actually, a lot of the time, these people are the polar opposite of what they claim to be, aren't they?
That's completely right. I mean, it's so interesting. All the time I get accusations of hatred, levelled at me. And I don't hate anybody. I respect everybody. And, if they wanted to, take away rights from lesbian, gay and transgender people, then I would be there absolutely marching on the street. Of course, everybody has equal human dignity and equal human rights. But having a particular point of view, which, Graeme and J.K. Rowling have, when it comes to the safeguarding of children, doesn't mean that you're full of hate. And one example being was the other day, I came across one of these rainbow crossings. I'd never seen one before. And it was dark, twilight was coming in, and these kids ran onto it from out of nowhere. The lights weren't working, the traffic lights. And I had to slam the brakes on really quickly because my brain didn't quite adjust to this sort of rainbow thing on the ground. I didn't see it properly. And I just said this on Twitter. I said, these things are a death trap. And I ended up having to block about 1,000 people because the abuse was just so extreme. And all I had said was rainbow crossings are dangerous and a hazard.
Yeah, and Caroline, don't you think, one of the things that I've been worrying about is it seems quite counterproductive to the cause that the gender identity advocates want to support, because to me, as an ordinary person, if I see on one side ordinary women raising legitimate and genuine concerns about safeguarding, protecting their own rights, and another group basically harassing, intimidating and saying death threats for holding another opinion to which actually most people have held for hundreds, if not thousands of years, then, you probably feel pushed to the one side or the another. It's quite a polarising thing to do, to threaten people. So would you not agree that this could actually be quite counterproductive on the part of the trans activists?
Yes, it is completely it's completely counterproductive, but it's also very, very frightening. So, I almost got prosecuted because I misgendered Susie Green's child, and I called out the fact that Susie Green had taken her then son to Thailand on his 16th birthday to have all this surgery. And I called it castration and mutilation and, abusive. Now, of course, that was very strong words, but I used those words because I wanted people to be aware that when we're talking about transitioning of children, that we are talking about very severe, long-lasting, permanent measures which lead to lifelong sterility. This is major surgery. This isn't just putting on a dress. This is, having sex organs removed. And I found myself under investigation by the police for that. Like Graeme was, I was sued in the High Court twice for £100,000 each time. The cases went away because there was no case. I was threatened with being sued a third time in January by the same activist. And the problem is that these people are using the police force and the judicial system to do the formally harass others for you. And the reason, as Patrick said that they want to take away your family, your children, your job. I mean, I've been really, really lucky in that regard, in that I've had such wonderful, supportive employers. But the reason they want to do that is pour encourager les autres, in order to show ordinary women what happens when they start speaking up for their sex-based rights.
Like the mafia. Caroline, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on the show, as always. And of course, Caroline Farrow, their campaign director of Citizen Go. And I'm going to start calling them the Rainbow Mafia.
I mean, just quickly, I actually had a similar experience of this.
Here we go.
Last Sunday, I was in a pub and I took a picture of the fact that there wasn't clearly signed female toilets, and it was crazy that it said men's and gender neutral, and many of my friends went to ask for the female toilets and they were pointed to the gender neutral one, and I raised this on Twitter and overwhelmingly people were supportive of it. But there was a small and incredibly intense group of people that were sending me hundreds of messages calling me a transphobe, calling me a trans hater for just raising a concern about the lack of single-sex provision for women. And I do think that actually when this happens, this pushes ordinary people like me who have a lot of sympathy with people that have a sense of difference between how they view themselves in their body. But if you are asking me to choose between that kind of activism and women raising concerns, then I am going to choose women raising concerns.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really counterproductive and polarising to sympathy and empathy towards the cause that these activists are trying to put forward, because I actually do have a lot of sympathy for them, but I don't accept the intimidation and harassment that women are going through.
No, because that's not the way that... That's not the principles upon which this country and indeed the world should operate. There's a bloke who was a friend of a friend, right? So, and obviously we're not going to name him here. Classed himself as a non-binary pansexual, so not part of the trans community. But he's adamant, absolutely adamant, right? That basically being a woman is just a feeling. Well, he's 6'4", he's got a hulking great big beard, he looks like he kind of, is a massive rugby player, that kind of guy. Well, I'm sorry, but excuse me for thinking that maybe you're not best placed to tell women what a woman is.
But the thing is, we already know. We know what a woman is. This is the thing.
Yeah.
It's either people that are lying and pretending to, fend off activists, or everybody else who say, well, I know what my mother, my sister, my wife, my girlfriend, my female friends are. I know what makes them a woman. I mean, humans have evolved for hundreds of thousands of years to be able to sex people on sight. You can literally look at people in a row, shave their hair off, all wear the same clothes, and you will be able to determine who is a man and who is a woman.
Yeah.
We all know what it is already.
No, exactly. And actually, again, we were saying earlier, we're wondering whether or not we should every single time we get an MP on now. Regardless of what they're on to talk about, just ask them right at the end what their definition of a woman is. But the jury's out on whether or not we should do that. But I'm keen to know, because if you can't answer that question, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be anywhere near power. Anyway, keep all your thoughts coming into us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after this very, very, very short break. Stay tuned.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather from the Met Office. Different feel out there today. It's not as cold as it was, but it is quite a grey day with many of us seeing outbreaks of rain. Here's the reason why. Low pressure up to the northeast with these two weather fronts. In between them, some mild air, but still a lot of isobars across the chart. So it is still a fairly breezy day, and there's an awful lot of cloud around as well, bringing rain at times. Certainly a wet day for western Scotland, Northern Ireland. The rain a bit patchy elsewhere, and we do have some breaks in the cloud, a bit of sunshine over southeast Scotland, northeast England, and brightening up at times across parts of southern England and South Wales. And if we see a hint of sunshine, temperatures could easily pop up to 14, 15 degrees. So it is quite a bit warmer than it was for much of last week. During this evening, that rain will continue for Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Again, patchy rain elsewhere, particularly over hills. But again, largely dry across eastern England. Not much rain across the south either. All the cloud keeping the temperatures up. It is going to be a mild night with temperatures well above freezing. 8, 9, 10 degrees the low across the southeast. But cold air isn't far away from the northeast of Scotland, getting colder across Shetland and the mainland. And with the wet weather here, we're going to start to see more snow falling, initially over hills on Tuesday, but coming down to low levels by the end of the day across the far northeast. So that could cause some disruption, quite a bit of snow by the time we get to Wednesday. Wet weather working into Northern Ireland. It'll be rain here, as it will be through the central belt of Scotland. Much of England and Wales, dry and fine tomorrow, and we'll see some sunny spells across the south, which could see highs of 16 Celsius. So quite a contrast between north and south during Tuesday, and that will continue as the snow, if anything, gets heavier on Tuesday night across.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls, and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate, and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Good morning, everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and the wonderful Anaya Falarin-Iman on your TV, radio and online. We're with you for another hour. Keep your views coming in as well. Loads to discuss today. Of course, we're going to be looking at the cost of living crisis. Are you feeling the squeeze just yet? The latest from Ukraine and some funny little stories to round off the show as well.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting through those throughout the show, but first it's time for latest news.
Well, a very good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the UK Prime Minister says Vladimir Putin's arsenal will never break the spirit of Ukraine's people or conquer their homeland. It's after a spokesperson for the Ukrainian president said authorities had found what looked exactly like war crimes. Satellite images show a mass grave approximately 14 metres long in the grounds of a church in Bucha. The Kremlin says it categorically denies any accusations related to the murder of civilians there. Volodymyr Zelensky says war crimes will be examined by the UN Security Council on Tuesday.
I want every mother of every Russian soldier to see the bodies of dead people in Bucha, Irpin and Gostomel. How was it possible to rape women and kill them in front of their children, making fun of their bodies even after they died? Why did they crush people's bodies with tanks? What did the Ukrainian city of Bucha do to Russia? How did all of this become possible?
Well, the UK Foreign Secretary has announced £10 million of support for organisations that are working with survivors of sexual violence in Ukraine. Liz Truss is travelling to Poland to meet with her Ukrainian and Polish counterparts and aid organisations supporting Ukrainian refugees. Well, the UK's Defence Ministry says Russian forces, including mercenaries, are refocusing their offensive in the Donbass region in Ukraine. Lord Charles Powell, former foreign policy advisor to Margaret Thatcher, predicts the war will go on for a while yet.
Putin will now, having got a bit of a bloody nose by trying to attack Kiev, will now actually refocus more on the south and the east, the Donbass area, to try to expand the amount of territory which is under Russian control there. And that will presage an even more violent battle, I'm afraid.
The International Trade Secretary said the UK must build its green economy to eliminate Russian fuel from our energy mix once and for all. Anne-Marie Trevlin says it must work with reliable energy partners to protect our supply chains and steady the global market. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused turmoil in global energy markets. Wales Minister Simon Hart says there's huge potential in offshore wind farms in Wales and that there's more public support for offshore wind farms than onshore.
I think onshore is more complicated. I think it only works in Wales, where you've got significant community buy-in, and that's a very big if. And that community buy-in isn't around just about turbines, it's also about the infrastructure that supports turbines. So I think public support is much more noticeable in the floating offshore sector and, of course, in nuclear, which is where we really think we can make some significant progress relatively soon.
The government's former ethics chief has reportedly been fined over the Partygate scandal. The Daily Telegraph says Helen McNamara, who used to be the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, received a £50 fine in connection with a leaving do that was held in the Cabinet Office in June of 2020. Well, 20 fixed penalty notices have been issued as part of the police investigation into COVID rule-breaching parties in Westminster. For those heading overseas on the first day of the Easter holidays, flights have been cancelled and cross-channel services have been hit by major delays. Eurotunnel is warning its rail services to Calais are delayed by 3 hours. British Airways cancelled at least 115 flights today. EasyJet did the same preemptively yesterday, with 62 flights scheduled for today cancelled. EasyJet cancelled actually more than 200 flights over the weekend, blaming sickness and staff shortages on COVID. Travel editor of The Independent, Simon Calder, says many families are falling at the first hurdle on their first holiday for a couple of years.
You're one of the tens of thousands of people whose flights have been cancelled today, then the airline absolutely has to get you to your destination as swiftly as possible. They have to provide compensation if you've been held up by more than 3 hours, and they're also going to have to get you some hotel accommodation if you're stuck.
Shortness of breath, having an aching body and also loss of appetite are 3 of 9 symptoms that have newly been added to the official list of COVID-19 signs of illness. Well, the changes were added to the NHS website. They emerged just days after free universal testing for coronavirus ended in England. Infection levels have hit a record high in the UK. Almost 5 million people are estimated to currently have the infection. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's return to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman, and Patrick Christys on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up for your final hour, so here's what's on the menu.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he wants to provide Ukraine with anti-ship missiles to protect the city of Odessa from a possible naval invasion. We'll be going live to speak to a member of the Odessa City Council for the latest on the war there.
Yes, and this weekend marked 40 years since the Falklands War, with ceremonies commemorating the conflict held up and down the country. We're talking to one former parachute regiment commander about his experiences of the conflict.
Indeed. Now, the government is expected to unveil its energy strategy this week, and what can we expect to help alleviate the ongoing cost of living crisis? We'll find out.
We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, so make sure you get in touch with your views, GB Views, at gbnews.uk.
Right, well, it's day 40 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and world leaders have condemned atrocities in towns retaken by the Ukrainian forces.
Yes, authorities say they have found what looks exactly like war crimes and accuse Russia of committing a massacre.
Indeed. Now, in Bucha, just outside the capital of Kiev, bodies of civilians with bound hands and close-range gunshot wounds were found. Evidence of torture and mass graves was also present. Prime Minister Boris Johnson condemned the despicable civilian attacks, saying they were yet more evidence of war crimes. Well, Ukrainian President Zelensky, addressing the Grammy Awards hours ago, urged viewers to tell the truth about the war. So the revelations of civilian executions come after a weekend of fighting around the capital in which Ukrainian forces liberated the entire Kiev region. Well, joining us now live from Odessa to give us the latest is Peter Albukov, a member of the Odessa City Council. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Now, our Prime Minister has said that he wants to provide you, really, with anti-ship missiles to help secure Odessa. Are you fully expecting a naval invasion?
We are not expecting a fully naval invasion because it's a suicide mission for Russians, because they don't have support from land. At first, you have to support from land to attack from the sea, because we have some missiles, but not so good. They use their warships to attack our city by missiles. We had 2 missile strikes this night and the night before. The night before they attacked our oil storage, and today they have attacked, I can't say what, but one man is dead after that. And we need to stop it, and it could be stopped if we will sink their warships, which are staying in Crimea, Sevastopol.
And also, Peter, Zelensky has been grateful for much of the Western support, but has also been critical over the last few weeks, thinking that the Western military support hasn't necessarily gone far enough. I mean, there was discussions a few weeks ago about a no-fly zone, which has been ruled out, seemingly by NATO forces and so on. I mean, do you think that Western military support hasn't gone far enough?
The war is not over, and I think that everybody in this world, except Mr. Putin, is interested to stop this war, because your country also paying the price. Your prices, for example, for oil or for products in grocery stores are rising, and a lot of refugees in a lot of countries in Europe. So if you will help us more, this war will be stopped sooner, and everybody will benefit from that. But I would like to thank for all that help that we have received from your country. I think that your country gave us more than any other.
Okay. Well, it is a pleasure to have done that for you. Obviously, not that I'm taking any credit for it. I had nothing to do with it. But as a nation, it is. And I think actually when you look at the way that France and Germany, for example, have reacted. I mean, I was absolutely disgusted by the way that the German government has reacted. They're sending over something like a couple of thousand helmets. I mean, for goodness sake. I mean, you would have thought that if there was one country in Europe who might want to step up to the plate, it would be them. But alas. Would you be content with Ukraine accepting neutrality as a way of ending this war? There are rumours, aren't there, that potentially Zelensky might go to Putin and say, OK, no EU, no NATO. Would that be acceptable to you, or has it gone too far now?
As I have seen in opinion polls, 80% of Ukrainians support of acceptance to NATO, to join in NATO, and the European integration also has very much support. We have a revolution in 2014 because of our previous president Yanukovych has not signed agreement of association with European Union. So I believe that it's impossible. And if you look what they are saying that these points would be accepted only after referendum. So in Ukraine, the government can't do things that are not acceptable by people. In Russia, they can. So in Russia they don't understand why we can't sign such an agreement. I believe that the war will last at least 1-2 months, and it would end when the Russian soldiers and Russian tanks, Russian airplanes will end, and it's possible.
On that point about a referendum and the fact that there is strong support for NATO and EU membership amongst Ukrainian people, I mean, has there been assurances on the part of Western leaders that that would be something that the NATO and the EU would accept on the chance that there was a referendum that voted with strong support for Ukraine entering those two bodies and institutions?
You see, it's interesting question. You can't do referendum. You can't make it while the war is going. It's impossible by Ukrainian law. And also, joining EU and NATO is written in our constitution. So we need to change constitution. It is not possible to do faster than 1 year. So I think that it's such a trick which we are doing with Russia on these negotiations, speaking about these points, because it's impossible for us to do. It's just impossible. So I believe that Ukraine would be in European Union and maybe in NATO if NATO accepts it.
Peter, I'd just like to ask you, in light of what we've seen in Bucha, for example, and other places around Kiev, and no doubt will emerge from places like Mariupol, what looks like war crimes, okay? Really disgusting acts appearing, what appeared to be really disgusting acts anyway by the Russian soldiers against Ukrainian civilians. Are you very scared of a Russian manoeuvre in Odessa now? Because it doesn't look like it's going to end well, frankly, for any of the civilians, and potentially innocent people are deliberately being targeted. How are you feeling about that prospect?
I'm not scared. I see the map, and on the map you can see that first Russians have to take Mykolaiv, then they have to take Voznesensk, and after that came to Odessa. And I know that there are a lot of our forces there. They already struck between Mykolaiv and Kherson, and I believe that we will liberate Kherson, and I don't believe that it's possible for them to come to Odessa. Even if so, it would take months for them to take Odessa, and I don't believe that that would happen. And I also don't believe that they will use small forces which are now in Transnistrian quasi-republic in Moldova.
Right. Thank you very much. Look, Peter, good luck to you.
Thank you.
And good luck to everyone who you represent as well there as Odessa City Council. And fingers crossed, we'll all be thinking of you. Peter Obyukov there, who is a member of Odessa City Council.
I think he made a very fascinating point in relation to a referendum on Ukrainian neutrality. And, the question that I was trying to ask, and he, answered it there. I mean, do they have assurances that Western countries will accept Ukraine into NATO and the European Union? I do think that is a discussion that we need to have much more information on in the event there was a referendum and it voted overwhelmingly for both of those entries.
Absolutely. And I thought it was a really fascinating point now, because basically what he was saying there was that they would have to have a referendum, essentially, if they wanted to join NATO or the EU or whatever. Or, likewise, if they wanted to accept neutrality. And they can't have a referendum now, can they? Because there's a war, right? So they can't have it. So in terms of negotiating, Zelensky and Putin, they're going there and Putin can say, right, OK, well, you have to guarantee neutrality. Well, Zelensky can't do that. So actually, his hands are potentially tied there. It's an interesting situation, though.
Yeah, no, I think that you make a very, very important point there. Well,
rarely happens, but there we go. Every now and again. Well, earlier on, we spoke to Major General Sir Tim Cross, didn't we? He's a retired British Army officer and a military logistics expert about the actions of Russian soldiers in Ukraine and if they can be categorised as war crimes.
I was a witness, actually, at the International Court in The Hague for war crimes in the Balkans. I served there 3 times in the 90s. And it is very difficult to prove and convict people of war crimes. One of the issues is finding the people who actually did it on the ground, the tactical level, if you like. And then there's the issue of the commanders and whether they actually ordered this to happen or whether they ignored it or, whatever the circumstances were. But I don't have any doubts at all that there is terrible things happening in Ukraine. I have to say, probably on both sides to some degree, but nonetheless, I'm sure the Russian atrocities are far worse, and what we're seeing here is clear evidence of that. Hearsay is not enough. Even photographic evidence actually is not sufficient in and of itself, because when people are, in inverted commas, scattered around, their dead bodies, etc., it's very difficult to prove how they were killed. Now, some of the stories we're hearing is that the people are, in mass graves or gathered together under tarpaulins or whatever. So, there are certain ways of doing that, but you do need clear evidence that's going to stand up in court, because, rightly or wrongly, whoever ends up by being indicted will have defense lawyers and so forth who will do all they can to pull the evidence apart. These are not surprising. What is happening is not surprising. I'm afraid that in the UK and the West generally, we've become a little bit, we've become very, very, not arrogant, but we don't understand the terrible things that go on in these places. I mean, I've watched the mass graves being dug up in Iraq. I've seen what people do to each other in places like Northern Ireland. My brigade built and ran refugee camps in Kosovo. War is always chaos, uncertainty, and awful things, terrible things happening on both sides. And we shouldn't be surprised that this has happened. Now, that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't take it, as we are, quite rightly, extremely seriously. And we should do all we can to help the Ukraine in particular to gather the evidence that's going to end up by putting people in front of that international court. It takes a long time. We're still seeing people indicted as a result of Kosovo and indeed of the Balkans and so on. But what part of this is the culture of the organizations we're talking about. In the British military, we put a lot of time and effort into teaching our guys things like the Geneva Conventions, the laws of armed conflict, the rules of engagement, and there is evidential proof that we do that. So the culture is a part of how the soldiers will behave and react on the battlefield. So investigating how people are trained, what they're taught, how they're dealt with when things go wrong is all a part of this picture. But nonetheless, it is, I'm afraid, very difficult to prove individuals are culpable at the end of the day. There will be all sorts of reasons why people will be able to, cover themselves over and so on. But it doesn't mean to say we mustn't try. It doesn't mean to say that we mustn't do what is happening now, which is as this evidence is uncovered, photographic evidence is pulled together, the highly trained guys who go in and do and investigate these sort of crimes. I mean, when I say I watched the war graves being, or the graves, the mass graves being dug up, there were people there from around the world gathering that evidence. They knew what they were doing, and they were able to pull together some pretty insightful reports. So that must happen. We must ensure that happens.
That was Major General Sir Tom Cross, retired British Army officer, giving us his perspective on the accusations of war crimes against Russia.
A Major General and a Sir as well. I mean, that's an impressive resume, isn't it? Major General. Someone had to introduce me with the words Major General and Sir before they got to my name. Right, I'd feel so powerful. But anyway, there we go. Well,
I don't mind being a dame.
No, yes. Do you get to choose?
I think dame is for women.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't self-identify.
Well, not these days. Not these days. But seriously, do you think you get to choose can't you be your dame off? Isn't it like Lord? Because you're Lord
Baroness. I think, is it Baroness?
Ah, there you go.
Baroness.
See, well, it's never gonna come my way anyway, is it? So I don't have to learn these things. But yeah, look, thank you everyone who's been getting in touch. Just do a couple of these views for you, really. This is on the trans issue we were talking about earlier. Sharon's been in touch. Thank you, Sharon. I had a very disconcerting experience of watching my 11-year-old granddaughter have to use a gender-neutral toilet in Cornwall recently. She was followed in by two burly blokes, and she was worried, and rightly so. Of course, you'd be worried.
Oh, exactly. I mean, how far does this so-called inclusivity go when it actually just ends up being really harmful and exclusive? People say, oh, gender-neutral toilets means that everybody can go in, there's no problem. But yeah, what if there are two, big burly men, and you send your daughter that wants to go to the toilet, and then she's on her own there? I mean, yes, it doesn't mean that every single man is going to do something horrible, but safeguarding is to make sure that you put mechanisms in place to protect against a few that will do something.
It's just logic, isn't it? It's just, or in fact, it's illogical, really. This is the thing. Why would you want to take even that risk?
Yeah, I agree.
For the benefit of the appeasement of a fraction of a percent of the amount of people in the country. I mean, I wish I was as vocal about the things I want in my life as some of these people, because apparently it has to happen then. But anyway, after the break. This weekend marked the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. We'll be talking to another major. We've doubled up on Major Generals. Major General Chip Chapman, who served as platoon commander with the Parachute Regiment during the war. So stay tuned.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather from the Met Office. Different feel out there today. It's not as cold as it was, but it is quite a grey day, with many of us seeing outbreaks of rain. Here's the reason why. Low pressure up to the northeast, with these two weather fronts. In between them, some mild air, but still a lot of isobars across the chart, so it is still a fairly breezy day, and there's an awful lot of cloud around as well, bringing rain at times. Certainly a wet day for western Scotland, Northern Ireland. The rain a bit patchier elsewhere, and we do have some breaks in the cloud, a bit of sunshine over southeast Scotland, northeast England, and brightening up at times across parts of southern England and South Wales. And if we see a hint of sunshine, temperatures could easily pop up to 14, 15 degrees. So it is quite a bit warmer than it was for much of last week. During this evening, that rain will continue for Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Again, patchy rain elsewhere, particularly over hills. But again, largely dry across eastern England. Not much rain across the south either. All the cloud keeping the temperatures up. It is going to be a mild night with temperatures well above freezing. 8, 9, 10 degrees the low across the southeast. But cold air isn't far away from the northeast of Scotland, getting colder across Shetland and the mainland. And with the wet weather here, we're going to start to see more snow falling, initially over hills on Tuesday, but coming down to low levels by the end of the day across the far northeast. So that could cause some disruption, quite a bit of snow by the time we get to Wednesday. Wet weather working into Northern Ireland. It'll be rain here, as it will be through the central belt of Scotland. Much of England and Wales, dry and fine tomorrow. We'll see some sunny spells across the south, which could see highs of 16 Celsius. So quite a contrast between north and south during Tuesday, and that will continue as the snow, if anything, gets heavier on Tuesday night across northern Scotland. So there's something, as I say, we need to watch, could cause some disruption. We're going to see showery rain crossing the country during Wednesday. It turns brighter and drier to the end of the week, but colder for all of us.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
It's 11:27 a.m. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren-Inman and Patrick Christys. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, well, this weekend, multiple events were held to mark the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. The war lasted for 74 days after Argentine forces invaded the Falklands on the 2nd of April 1982. Now, 3 days later, a task force set sail from the UK, eventually involving almost 26,000 armed forces personnel and 3,000 civilian crew. 235 British service personnel very sadly died during that campaign, as well as 3 civilian Falkland Islanders.
Well, joining us now to talk more about this is Major General Chip Chapman, who served in the Falklands War as a platoon commander in the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, what's your reaction as we've commemorated the Falklands War?
Well, really, I've got great pride in what we achieved, both land, sea and air forces. And in our own particular case, in 2-Para, we had great pride that we were the inheritors of the men who fought on the bridge at Arnhem, because without history, there is no legacy. Without legacy, there is no history. And we didn't want to let them down. We didn't want to let ourselves down. And we didn't want to let the British people down. And we were there to fight and fight well. That was our job. And that's what we wanted to do.
Well, you certainly did that. I mean, look, give us a first-hand experience, really, of what exactly you guys did over there, and yeah, just kind of just run us through it, really, if that's okay. Some of the key events, as it were, for you.
Yeah, it is a very episodic war. So we landed on the 21st of May and had a huge march to a place called Sussex Mountain, where we stayed for the next 5 days. And we were degrading because this was a winter war. It was the environmental conditions, the weather, the climate were awful. I mean, there's no trees in the Falklands. It was really bare and people were suffering. By day 3, I'd lost one of my men with trench foot, sort of the World War I malady, and he was gone and we never saw him again till the end of the war. So we needed to get moving, and we moved on the 26th of May towards Goose Green and went to Camilla Creek House. And there did our battle procedure to do the original attack. Now, I was actually the first in contact with the enemy, and it was a rather bizarre contact with them, in the sense that someone came towards us, and initially we thought it was a scarecrow because this was 2:30 in the morning. He was taken out. That initiated an attack on a position, enemy positions behind that, and we took those all out with no casualties. And that was really critical for us, because we believed from that moment on that we were invincible and that we would win this war. And war, of course, is really not about killing the enemy. It's about imposing your will, breaking their will to resist. And we knew, personally, I knew from that moment on, that would take place. And the victory at Goose Green, the first victory by Two-Para, set the scene and the tone for the rest of the war and inspired the rest of the land forces, as we were inspired by the actions of the Navy and the Air Force in contributing to what went on.
No, indeed. And that is an absolutely terrific summary of what you guys did over there. And in stark contrast, actually, isn't it, to the way that Vladimir Putin's war has not exactly got off to the best of starts in Ukraine, whereas with yourselves over there, of course, you made a rip-roaring start, and it set the tone, as you said. There were, sadly, a lot of lives lost, British personnel's lives lost, and I mean, it must have been a very difficult time for you guys. Is that something that you remember when we have the anniversary of the Falklands? Is that something you spare a thought for as well there, those who didn't come home or came home but sadly didn't really return home?
Yeah, of course. At the times like this, I reflect that I lived to see the dawn of a new day when many others did not. And, you know, we respect what their families who are still there, and hope to see many of them on the anniversary events. I'll be at St. Paul's Cathedral tomorrow. And to remember those that fought, didn't come back, and to remind ourselves, particularly in this time with Ukraine, politicians and the youth who want to change the world, that the object of war should always be a better peace, and that should not be undertaken lightly. It should be done for good purposes. This was a just war. They'd invaded under Article 51 of the UN Charter. We had the right of self-defense. And I think the Ukraine is also probably the most morally just war from a Ukrainian and Western perspective since probably the Second World War. It's on a par with the Falklands, and that's why we should support Ukraine.
Indeed. And I just wanted to say, really, thank you very much for your service. Thank you very much for everything that you've done. And, yeah, you should be, obviously, as indeed you are, you know, tremendously proud, really, and a shining example of what it means to be in the British Armed Forces and, you know, to do your duty when you're called upon, really. So thank you very, very much. And it is massively appreciated. Although it was 40 years ago, it was before my time. It's certainly not lost on myself. I dare say it's not lost on Anaya as well. Major General Chip Chapman there, thank you very, very much. And, yeah, hopefully it's a pleasant service tomorrow at St. Paul's. It was before our time, wasn't it, Falklands? But, I mean, it does feel, even though it's miles away, of course, it does feel very close to home in some ways, actually. And I mean, I can remember spending a lot of time studying here. I had friends, actually, who live on the Falkland Islands. And so the way they talk about it, yeah, it was incredible, really, what happened there, I think.
Yes, I thought that the point that Major Chip Chapman made about the Ukrainian conflict being a just war insofar as it is very clear who the aggressors are. You know, Russia invading a sovereign nation, regardless of some of the challenges and complexities within Ukrainian society. That is a flagrant and unprovoked and unjustifiable violation of a sovereign nation. And I think that it's very clear who is the aggressor in that instance.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, look, after the break, the government is expected to unveil its big energy strategy later this week. I know, I can hardly wait. But we're looking at the latest developments amid reported rift between the Chancellor and the Business Secretary. But before that, let's have a look at this morning's headlines.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister says Britain will never waver from supporting our friends as he seeks tougher international sanctions against Vladimir Putin and Russia. Well, those comments come after a spokesperson for the Ukrainian president said authorities had found what looked exactly like war crimes. The Foreign Secretary has announced £10 million of support for organisations working with survivors of sexual violence in Ukraine. Liz Truss is travelling to Poland to meet with her Ukrainian and Polish counterparts in Warsaw. She'll also meet with aid organisations supporting Ukrainian refugees. The government's former ethics chief has reportedly been fined over the Partygate scandal. The Daily Telegraph says Helen McNamara was fined £50 in connection with a leaving do held in the Cabinet Office in June of 2020. For those heading overseas on the first day of Easter holidays, flights have been cancelled and cross-channel services have been hit by major delays. Eurotunnel is warning its rail services to Calais are delayed by 3 hours. British Airways cancelled at least 115 flights today. EasyJet has cancelled 62 preemptively that were supposed to take off today. Climate change campaigners are staging a protest at an oil facility near Heathrow Airport on their 4th day of action. Extinction Rebellion say around 30 protesters are at the Esso West oil facility in West London, where they're urging the government to stop using fossil fuels. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to the point.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering.
As their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
It's 11:37 a.m. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman and Patrick Christys. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
We are indeed. Now, a case is being heard today in the Royal Court of Belfast that aims to stop an amnesty for all Troubles-related cases in Northern Ireland. So the historical cases heard until now have mainly been state forces being brought back for examination with no convictions. So many say that the prosecutions are one-sided, and now the British government are pushing for an end to all such court actions.
Yes, we're now joined by our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, thank you for joining us this morning. Can you just let us know an update on this trial?
Well, this case is being brought by Patricia Burns and Daniel McCready, and it's, as you say, to try and stop an amnesty, a blanket amnesty from everything up to and prior to 1998 to do with the Troubles. These cases are very, very costly, but they are also becoming more and more divisive. 60% of the killings inside Northern Ireland during the Troubles were done by Republicans, and they basically received an amnesty off Tony Blair with letters of comfort and Queen's pardons of mercies. So the only people really being brought to stand trial here are the forces, the state, the police and the British Army. And they're having to come back for things that were done nearly 50 years ago. Now, it's causing a rift with the victims themselves, but also with the Irish government. The Republic of Ireland are saying that Northern Ireland and the British government has to stand by these cases, even with the custom and the fact that they are bringing no convictions whatsoever. I caught up with the Taoiseach at a event on Friday night, and the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, and I asked him about a case of Ian Sproul. Now, Ian Sproul was shot dead by the IRA, and in their one and only tribunal in the south to do with the Troubles, the Smithwick's Tribunal, it was named that there was collusion between the Garda Síochána, the Irish police, and the IRA, and John Sproul, the brother of Ian, has yet to meet the Irish Prime Minister, and the Irish Prime Minister is saying something entirely different to what's going on. Just listen to this.
And I don't have a difficulty in meeting the Sproul family, and I want to say, I have to be very categorical about this. On the legacy issue, the Irish government stood up to the plate in terms of the Smithwick Tribunal, and we saw it through. We started the Smithwick Tribunal and we saw it through. There can be no hiding place and the government of the Republic will not shelter or protect anybody in respect of any wrongdoing or any violence imposed on anybody. So I really would reject any assertion on that front.
He must have a long diary, because we're going on this years, emails, letters, and he still hasn't met me. If he's able to come here tonight to Northern Ireland, he's been able to come to Northern Ireland and meet me and other families. The collusion come to light, and the Semitic Tribunal were witness 6 dates said with beyond doubt there was a collusion and my brother's murder. There have been other collusion in the Republic of Ireland, but as one door after another being closed, and I'm going to keep this fight up till there must be truth and justice, and no comeback from the Republic of Ireland. What sickens me is they keep chatting about legacy. They're more unable and want to come to Northern Ireland to chat about legacy and blame everybody else. But when it's on their own door, they don't want to talk about it, don't want to meet me, and this must change. Legacy needs to be for everybody, just not the chosen few.
Well, there you go. Legacy must be for everybody, just not the chosen few. So it's no wonder then that many people here are talking about this having to change, this having to be looked at differently, and if victims to be standing outside in an event on legacy and they're not invited into it and they're not even met, that speaks volumes.
It does, Diggy, it does. Thank you very much for bringing us that. It is a massive issue and one that we've spoken about quite a lot on this show, and we'll continue to talk about. Diggy B today joining us. Yeah. I mean, these kind of gratuitous and needless historical prosecutions of a lot of our veterans. You know, Dennis Hutchings is the obvious example. I know I keep banging on about him, but it was in a horrendous case. 3 times he was dragged before a court. In the end, he died of COVID in Northern Ireland alone because of the way it was. I mean, he was found not guilty twice. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I interestingly enough, was in Belfast over the weekend. Last week, and it is really fascinating just to see how much that history is intertwined with everyday politics and everyday public life in Northern Ireland in a way that I think is just quite significantly different to the rest of the UK. It's quite fascinating.
Absolutely, wow.
Well, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng revealed yesterday that Britain could build 6 or 7 nuclear power stations by 2050 in order to move away from oil and gas. It follows reports that Boris Johnson and Mr Kwarteng have been at odds with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak over securing funding for new plants. The government's hotly awaited energy strategy is set to be published on Thursday. Well, joining us now to give us more information about this is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. I mean, Tom, it seems to have been a long time coming for these nuclear power plants. I mean, we know that in France, this is something that they've been doing for a long time. Germany had been closing them down, and now they're looking again to U-turning on that. I mean, people have been talking about the benefits of nuclear for a very long time.
They have. However, it has been a contentious issue because, of course, there is a big delay in terms of approving a nuclear power station and getting it up and running. Margaret Thatcher, in her time as Prime Minister, approved 3 nuclear power stations. Now, the ones that she approved are just about running down to the end of their useful life now. Unfortunately, the following 3 Prime Ministers, John Major, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, barely approved 1 between them. And really, where we are now is a sorry situation because there was sort of this worrying political, almost consensus on being worried about nuclear power for quite some time. Governments didn't really want to touch it. There were delays, there were reviews, and now where do we find ourselves? Well, in an energy crisis. And so belatedly, there seems to be a new political consensus with the Conservative Party and the Labour Party finally agreeing this is something that's good to do. However, the sad news is they're very expensive to get up and running, and we won't see the benefits for more than a decade. This is politicians taking a long-term view, but it won't help us out in the short term.
Well, then on that point, on a long-term view, it is quite worrying then that Rishi Sunak is perhaps the one that is a bit concerned about this. I mean, if we've heard all of this talk about needing to secure the future for future generations, so presumably we should accept that this might be a short-term hit for what may well be an incredibly beneficial long-term gain.
There is no doubt that there is a long-term gain to more nuclear power in this country. You need a baseload. When it comes to renewable energy, some of it has become really quite cheap and really quite good, but the fundamental problem is it's intermittent. The wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. You need what's called a baseload load of power, and that has traditionally come from oil, gas and coal in this country, but nuclear could be a much bigger. As you say, France, 70% of their electricity comes from nuclear.
Their bills haven't gone up as much as
and their bills have, they've gone up a little bit. Of course, there's other parts of the mix, but actually their bills are a lot better. There is a better situation in France because of that historic decision that was taken decades and decades and decades ago. Really, this is an issue where politicians need to take a long-term view, which is something that politicians are reticent to do.
Absolutely.
Because, of course, they're elected every 5 years. They're worried about the current political situation. That's why there's been a big delay. But ultimately, that long-term decision, the government would say, the fact that this is a decision that is being taken for future generations, perhaps it's been right to discuss it and debate it for a month longer than they were expecting initially, so that they can get that decision right.
Yeah. Tom, thank you very, very much. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent. You mentioned that the sun doesn't always shine. It certainly does when you're here, Tom, I must say. There you go. Right, well, look, of course, it was another week, wasn't it, where there have been some other suggestions as to how we can deal with the cost of living crisis, with the energy crisis, etc. And Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, actually, was forced to backtrack. He did one of those U-turns that we've become so aware of now, talking about the idea of rationing UK energy.
Yes, after appearing to suggest that he supported the rationing of power supplies in the UK. All this comes amid spiking energy prices and possible further increases in wholesale prices that could take place if European nations decide to give up on Russian oil and gas. Well, joining us now in the studio to discuss this is Andy Mayer, Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Thank you for joining us. I mean, I get there's been a bit of a backlash against this, but isn't this, to some extent, the kinds of imaginative and creative policies that we need to be thinking about in terms of how to get out of this energy crisis? This might not necessarily be the solution, but what we currently have is a problem of a complete dearth of ideas when ordinary people are being massively squeezed right now.
Well, the last thing we want at the moment is for the politicians to start believing they need to have extraordinary ideas, because they're terrible at it. And this idea in particular, rationing, it comes fundamentally from the International Energy Agency, who put out a 10-point plan a couple of weeks ago, saying, wouldn't it be brilliant if every country in the world started cutting down on energy use, for example, controlling the way they use their cars and doing more to stay at home rather than go to work. And no, they can't control people's lives at this micro level. This is not a good idea fundamentally.
Well, and tell me if this is a completely bizarre idea, but I had this idea that, remember when we had Eat Out to Help Out? I wondered if perhaps if we had a huge tax cut, but the condition was that ordinary people had to spend the money in the economy to get the economy boosted and growing again. I mean, is that potentially a possible idea, a big tax cut, so that we can actually spend our money and use it on boosting the economy?
Well, a big tax cut would boost the economy, but it obviously depends on the government then cutting spending so that you didn't then have to pay it back in the future. And that's been the whole experience of the pandemic with the furlough scheme, for example. We're paying that back now. National insurance is going up because we spent the money already.
What are you expecting then from Boris Johnson's big energy announcements? I mean, he's going nuclear, but we've got this delay, haven't we, between us actually announcing it and being able to do it?
I don't think we should expect too much on the announcement on Thursday. There could be some excitement in there that will be buried in the detail, which might actually make a big difference. But the headline stuff we do already know. They will try and bring nuclear on stream gradually, although if we look at the detail of that, that's 13 to 17 years away in terms of building even the first one. They will bring onshore and offshore wind back in some form, but we already have big rounds going on for offshore wind, and the onshore decision is really about planning reform.
Right.
And then so it is for solar. And then the fracking decision, they very cleverly kicked down the road for another 3 months, so that any decision taken there will be after the local elections.
But this is a fundamental lack of planning and preparation, isn't it, that we're witnessing?
Oh, massive, but for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of naivety about net zero and not considering affordability and security of supply in the planning process.
I mean, are we not going to expect any announcements on fracking, do you think? Is that still something that they're still very, very uncomfortable with?
Well, the fracking announcement has been pre-announced, so there will be a review of the scientific evidence as to whether or not it's safe,
but
which is a PR
more
exercise.
reviews,
More reviews.
Yeah, for 3 months.
good gosh, there we go. Well, so nothing's happening too quickly. In the short term, then, look, I mean, what can people do or what can people expect? I mean, we're just going to get hammered financially.
Yeah, the prices are going to stay high for some time. And although the price rise we're expecting in October has come down by £400, it's still a £600 rise. So energy is going to be extremely expensive. And what people will do is respond to that price rise. They will cut their energy use without the government doing a thing. So the rationing is already built into the system.
Yes. OK, that's interesting, actually, isn't it? Yes, the rationing's already built in, I suppose. And also, as you said, people aren't necessarily going to go out as much. So I suppose it's kind of stalling the economy in that sense as well, potentially. But
yeah.
Go on.
I was just going to ask, I mean, this isn't looking good for Rishi Sunak, though. I mean, he's taken a huge tumble in the polls. I mean, he had this high point in the last couple of years as the big magic money tree guy, and now he's really being hit by it. I saw something on Conservative Home where he is now third to last out of all the cabinet ministers in terms of approval rating.
Well, we call this a Nick Clegg moment. If we recall the career of the Meta chief executive of PR, then he was the most popular politician in Britain right up until the point he won an election, or rather did very well and joined the coalition. And then he actually had to take some real decisions. And Rishi Sunak's temporary popularity is now coming up against the reality of the hard choices he's got to make as Chancellor. And he's carrying the can for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Andy, thank you very much, as always. Andy Mayer, their Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA, not to be mistaken for the, International Energy Agency. That must really grate at you. And the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan as well, actually. So you're in a esteemed company. But there we are. Thank you very much, Andy. Right, let's take you through some of the headlines of the day that you might have missed. Prince William and the Duchess of Cambridge are reportedly planning to move into Windsor Castle in order for the Prince to stay very close to his grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen.
Yes.
That's nice. You don't really care, do you? You don't care about our royal family. You don't.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. I don't really care that you don't care. But anyway, there we go. The Cambridges, who currently split their time between Kensington Palace, London and Anmer Hall, Norfolk, are said to have been checking out a number of royal mansions closer to the Queen in Windsor. It's a hard life, isn't it?
Yeah, really
checking out a number of
challenging.
royal mansions by the
Whilst
royals.
we're all energy rationing.
Well, I'm sure they've had to cut their cloth as well.
Very
anyway,
true.
There we go. Go on, you do this one.
Well, the Royal Mail has announced that the price of the first price stamp will rise by 10 pence to 95 pence in total. The price of second-class stamps will also be raised by 2 pence to 68 pence. I mean, everything seems to be going up. I mean, Royal Mail stamps.
Yeah, when will it end?
Potentially, energy. Well, it's all just going up. I think that the government will be forced to do something. It's just not sustainable, I don't think, for ordinary people.
Well, no, not at all. We can't be posting things second class now, can we? The service defended the move, citing the need to deliver to a growing number of addresses, which was adding to costs. However, the rise has been criticised for coming at a time when the cost of living crisis is increasing. At no point in our country, I know I'm not about to get very angry about stamps, but at no point in our country have we made any kind of preparation whatsoever for population growth, have we? You know, whether it's to do with the transport systems, whether it's to do with the education system, for example, hospital beds, all of this stuff. And now, just delivering post. At no point did anyone go, hang on a minute, our population's going through the roof here, and try to make any kind of steps to combat that housing crisis.
I mean, I'm not sure. I think that a lot of these are political problems that have been, not solved because of long-term political failings. And I do worry, I mean, whether or not we needed to sell off the Royal Mail.
Yeah.
Is that really something that has benefited people in the long term?
Well, potentially not, right. Well, talking of which, a British man who bought an Italian house for 95p, the same price as a stamp, there you go, has said how his dream turned into a nightmare. Who could have guessed it, eh? After he failed to find a builder willing to renovate it.
Oh, well, the Italian government has been giving away historic houses for virtually nothing as rural migration has decimated small towns. The homeowners snapped up the deal, only to find it impossible to hire a builder to fix it up due to builder shortages in the country. I mean, well, perhaps they can hire somebody from abroad.
Hey, this is it, isn't it? Maybe we could maybe we could go the other way. We can start sending builders out there.
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be good. Yeah. See, we fixed it. You're welcome. But good luck, though. Good luck.
I wouldn't mind a house for 95p.
In a beautiful rural Italian setting. I think I might invest anyway. Right, so a way to finish the show. This is certainly an interesting story in a way. Let's get ready. Cows have long been identified as being a danger to the environment, particularly in industrial-scale farming. The reason? They're methane-rich flatulence, farts, containing harmful greenhouse gases. This is a way to finish the show, isn't it?
Lovely.
Farting cows.
It will take at least 3 years for the programme to begin to cut emissions as selective breeding gradually begets cattle that fart less. Either way, it is good for moss. For me.
Good for moss. It might be good for moss, but actually you're supposed to say it's good news.
It is good news for environment. Well, is that a pun?
I believe it's supposed to be a joke, yes, because cows moo, don't they? We do the moos. Yeah, all right, not your best. Not your best. Anyway, right. So basically this is non-farting cows.
Well, as long as it doesn't harm them.
Yeah, do you reckon they just balloon up gradually?
I know.
Maybe they...
Better out than in.
Better out than in. Absolutely, yes. And that does explain what I've been smelling throughout this show. No, but anyway, there we go. Right, so...
Well, I smelled something.
That's it from us. It's descended into madness, hasn't it? That's it from us here at To The Point, but don't go away. Up next is The Briefing with Tom Harwood. Thank you, everyone who got in touch, and keep those views coming in. GBNews.uk.
See you at the same time tomorrow.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather from the Met Office. Different feel out there today. It's not as cold as it was, but it is quite a grey day with many of us seeing outbreaks of rain. Here's the reason why. Low pressure up to the northeast with these two weather fronts. In between them, some mild air, but still a lot of isobars across the chart, so it is still a fairly breezy day, and there's an awful lot of cloud around as well, bringing rain at times. Certainly a wet day for western Scotland, Northern Ireland. The rain a bit patchier elsewhere, and we do have some breaks in the cloud, a bit of sunshine over southeast Scotland, northeast England, and brightening up at times across parts of southern England and South Wales. And if we see